Hi, we're live here at the Maxon booth, SIGGRAPH 2023. Check. Check 1, 2. Here we are, the last day, last couple presenters, and the presentation was so nice we had to do it twice. Bringing him back for round 2, Chad Perkins. Big round of applause for Chad. Woo!
Thank you. So this is going to be kind of a repeat of yesterday, but a little bit modified. There's a few things that I saved from yesterday for today, and we're talking about creating a Gothic environment. And this is a team effort with me and my buddy Ian Robinson from the Maxon training team, and he made this gargoyle that's like really sick that you'll see, and he taught yesterday how to do it, and I think he's going to do something different today. So if you're interested in figuring out how he made that gargoyle in Zbrush, then look that up. And I'm going to be focusing on Forger and Cinema 4D for my portion. We're going to be talking a little bit about like the art of Gothic stuff and a little bit of like art history when it comes to Gothic stuff. And I'm going to be talking a lot about Forger, which is an iPad. Anybody use Forger? Anybody ever play with Forger? No? No one? Okay. That's fine. Well, we're going to talk about Forger, so maybe I'll change your mind. Got an uphill battle, but we'll do it. So I'm like the main thing is creating the Gothic environment thing, but I have two like subtext things that I'm going to be focusing on, two focuses, and one of them is that tools don't matter. Or do they? We hear oftentimes, like when you're a student, people are like, "Oh, what software should I use?" And the old grizzly veterans are always like, it doesn't matter. Tools don't matter. It's like the people that matter. And I've said this before. It makes a lot of sense. It sounds really good on paper, but the more I kind of play with tools, the more I realize that, like, I don't know, for me, they matter. Like, and for you, they might not matter. For you, it might just be like, give me a paintbrush or Cinema 4D or a hammer or whatever. It doesn't matter. You're just going to make art, and that's all that matters. But for me, the experience of making something, it makes a difference to me. It impacts, like, the kind of stuff that I make and what I'm inspired to do. And so I'm going to be talking a lot about Forger, the iPad app that I mentioned, because I recently have kind of like fallen in love with it, and I suck at it really bad, and so I'm letting you in on this like vulnerable, intimidating process where I'm going to be showing you some garbage art that I made and some stuff that I'm kind of proud of. You could see like my growth, and I'm getting somewhere a little bit. But yeah, so tools, sometimes they can become more than tools, and we could have a special relationship with the tools. So that's one focus, is that tools don't matter, or do they? And the other one is that utilizing real-world cinematography to build a scene. And my background, I feel a lot more proficient working like on set with like real cameras and directors and gaffers and all these things. And for those of us that start in like a digital realm, we might not be as familiar with like focal length and things like that. And they can really impact the story that we're telling visually. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some cinematography principles. We're going to look at some like Hollywood movies and working behind the scenes and on set and how they lit things and the philosophy behind lighting things. And so yeah, it's going to be a fun little adventure. So I'm going to try this like crazy technical marvel where I'm going to try to mirror my iPad to this computer. And it worked. Okay, so now you're seeing my iPad here. So the concept I had was this. And this is terrible. This is supposed to be terrible, though. So don't withhold a little bit of judgment. You can judge me later if you want, but this is the concept. I was kind of like starting to sculpt this gargoyle, and it was like rough. But like I can kind of like look down the road, and down the road I could tell that it's still going to be garbage. So that's why I enlisted the help of Ian Robinson, who is a master at Zbrush. And again, I wish I would have shown the final before we switched over, so that you would know that there's good stuff coming and not just garbage like this. But it was really cool to work on Forger for this concept, because I could really quickly rough out a concept in just like a few minutes. Like I could build this literally in just a couple minutes, and this conveys the concept I had in my mind, as we'll see later, and you should have seen already, but I forgot. Also, I'm realizing that I didn't get my notes out because I'm polished like that. But let me get my notes out so I remember like where I'm at. Okay, so let me just give you like a little like intro to the world of Forger with this kind of like blank canvas here. We have two contexts up in the at the top. You see that? We have like modeling and sculpting. And like that's kind of, for me, the fun of Forger is that like, we can't expect it to be like a desktop application. It's like a mobile thing on your device, but it has the Cinema 4D modeling engine like built in. So there's like all these like polygonal tools. There's extrude and bevel, and you could select polygons and stuff like that, as we'll see. And there's also sculpting. And so like I could kind of like hop back and forth between these two worlds, which is really fun. So I could go over here to the little hamburger menu next to the model sculpt thing, and let's say model for now. And I could go over here, and I could click this little plus icon, and I could make all this stuff. And there's more primitives here. There's also some like lights here that I can make. But let's say, for example, I'll make a tube, which is like one of the things that I did earlier. I made a tube. And it's super tiny, so I could just hit this little button in the upper right and like warp right to it. And of course, I have these little like fun little handle thingies, like kind of how they have in Cinema, so I could kind of get to where I want quicker using these tools. But also go into this like drop down at the top, and I could manually change these values, like the inner radius, the outer radius, all the tubey things that we like to do. And this is looking a little like jagged and polygonal, so I could go in here and I could increase the rotation segments, crank that up to max 64. And actually there's a little secret here too. If I click and tap any of these values, there's like a little like calculator that pops up, and I could like copy and paste. I can do like math things with like add, multiply, all the things, and type in like decimal points, whatever I want to do there, which is pretty cool. So I have all that control, and then what I could do is actually let me give this some height segments here. And I can't see my wireframe, so I need to go to my display settings, turn on wireframe. So now I can see my wireframe, and I can see what's going on here. Now this is still like a primitive object, so I can control like the attributes of it, and change like the geometry with like these values and things like that, just like in Cinema. But then what I could do is go to the objects menu, hold my finger down, and say, make this editable. You notice that I also have the choice to make this sculptable if I want to too. So I could use this as a base for a sculpt. I could use this as a base for a polygonal editing thing. So I'm going to click make editable. And then I could go over here to my options, and I could choose to edit the polygons, the edges, the vertices, all that stuff. I could choose a selection tool, and I could just like, I could actually use the Apple Pencil if I wanted to as well. And I could just like click and drag to select my polygons. And that's really fun. It's a really fun thing. Normally you have to have like a mouse, and I don't know. There's something about using a mouse that's you're like by proxy controlling a little like arrow thingy with this like mouse. Nice work. You've done mouse things. But for me, it's like really cool to be able to just like have a device and just like like I'm just like touching it with the pencil. I don't know. Just like the relationship to the experience is very different and quite fun for me. There's also some like hidden tricks too. So like if I double click on one of the horizontal edges, it creates a loop that way. If it on a vertical edge, it creates a loop that way. So there's a lot of like built-in hidden power inside of Forger like this, where there's just a lot of stuff built underneath the hood to give you a lot of flexibility. And I dig on that. So one of the things that I did is, I double-click to make a loop, but if I click on another polygon, then that selection goes away, and that can be frustrating and or sad. And so on the right-hand side, I have this set up as a lefty, but you can switch it to if you're a right-handed. If you're a normal-handed person, you can do that. If you're an oddly-handed person like me, then this is going to be on the right side. So I can hold down this little plus modifier thing. You seeing that? So there's like no modifier, modifier, no modifier, modifier. See on the right side? So that's a plus. So now if I make another selection, I'm adding to this selection that already exists. And I can hold a minus and then subtract this selection, like so. So now I have a pretty cool selection. I think some stuff selected on the back here that I don't want. And I can just go ahead and quickly get rid of all this stuff. Actually, I'm going to get rid of all this stuff on the back. I just want the front. So then, I don't want the top either. Do I have anything on the bottom? Yeah, I do. I don't want anything anywhere. It's just on these edges. Okay, there we go. So now what I could do is perform, one of the standard thingy. So I could go to extrude, click on this, and then just extrude these polygons out. And I did this for this chandelier here that we'll see in a second. And I use this as a base, and then I could go back over here and then convert this to a sculptable object. And then I can go and use the sculpting tools on it and shape it in that way. So I really like the kind of like organic rough surfaces. Like whenever you start sculpting something, it's just kind of like a little bit more like rough, and it has like a great like hand hewn feel, which is like really perfect and kind of hard to get with polygonal modeling alone. So like if I'm just gonna not save this, it's not really worth saving. But like if I go over here, there's like a little like platonic in the background. See that little bad dude there? And that was meant to be kind of like a placeholder in case I had time to make this like chandelier. And I actually did have time to make a chandelier, which is pretty fun. And I made the chandelier entirely from scratch in Forger, which is pretty cool. I need to change the camera lens here. There we go. So this is a little chandelier that I made from scratch in Forger. All the materials, everything. This is all in Forger. And I actually used a lot of new features in Forger. I didn't intend to, but they came in real handy. Like the little spirals here on the, you're seeing that spiral action. That's made with a new feature called Sweep. And I'm going to show you how this works. This is fun. I'm going to go to my modeling context, and I'm going to go to Sweep. And what I can do here, what a sweep does, is that you can just draw a path, and then it extrudes a shape along the path. So if you look at the right-hand side, it's choosing the camera thing, so I'm like navigating around. But what I can do is click this little button below the camera icon, frame selection, and then once I click and drag, I'm going to be making a sweep. And then I need to get off of that and go back to the camera. And now I could kind of like pilot around and see this little like cinnamon roll turd thing that I made. And I could go and click on any of these points. I could adjust the Bezier handles there. See what I'm doing there? That's a pretty good time. If I go over to my sweep options at the top, there's like a end scale. So I could take this down and I could taper that. So I have this like tapered thing. And again, I could go and hold down my finger, the pencil, and I could make this sculptable or editable. So I could use this as a base for other stuff that I want to make, which is really fun. So that's how I made those that little design there that we saw before for the chandelier. Another cool thing that I did that's a fun little trick that I just discovered is that by default, you just have a circle here that's being extruded. You see that? A little circle? And I could change the size of that circle. But I basically just have a circle that's being extruded around my little shape. And what I can do is go to the curve and take this from Bezier to linear, and then now I have this kind of like a diamond shape that's extruded. So that's how I was able to get those kind of facets on that thing, which is like pretty cool. Also, I took time to make it not look crappy. And I'm not going to take the time to make it not look crappy right now, but just know that that's possible. Another new feature, actually I'm just going to go back to right where I was, that's kind of similar, is if I'm in the modeling context, I can lathe. So I can actually, I love how this is set up, because I click to create an axis for the lathe, and a lathe is going to create something that's like a rotational symmetry. So yesterday, for example, I created like a little mushroom. So I'm just going to create like the side of a mushroom, like as if it were kind of like a cross-section of a mushroom, and make a cute little mushroom butt at the bottom. Whoop. There we go. And then now I'm going to change my camera. And now I have a cute little mushroom. See a little mushroom there? So it's great for creating like vases, fountains, stuff that kind of like spins around, like baseball bats, things like that would kind of like spin around a wine glass or something like that. And again, it's like this really fun process because I'm doing it like with my hands on a device, like actually drawing on the thing. It's pretty fun. Another aspect of Forger that I really love that I kind of discovered through this process was the ability to kind of play with materials. So as I go here, you can see that first of all, I need to center my camera. There we go. So this doesn't have any materials on it. What I could do is go to this little kind of like swatches icon at the top here, and this is where my materials are. So I can click the plus icon, I'll click PBR standard, and then I could just go to emit color if I want even emission, and I can go and let's say that's where I want my color to be. And I can now have this thing, and I can just drag and drop it onto an object, and now I have this like illuminated texture, which is really fun. And this is made even cooler when we go to our display settings. And last year we introduced this kind of like these kind of like effects to our stuff. So we can click on effects, which is viewport effects, and enable this. And there's like, ambient occlusion, depth of field, and it all works in like real time, like while you're sculpting, while you're playing around. You can see that I have like a vignette around my frame, it's like darkening around the edges because that's vignettes are sexy and it brings you in and stuff like that. I also have a bloom going here. So you see like the light bloom, and I'm going to scoot this over to the side so you can see the difference here. But like if I turn this off and then on, you can see that the vignette goes away, the bloom around the light goes away. So I like to have that on because it doesn't really slow things down for me very much, at least the kind of stuff that I do. And so it's kind of nice. So I could go in and add like other textures to this, but I'm going to spare you on that. But it's kind of cool and just add something to the vibe when you have this kind of like flexibility. One other feature I want to share with you here is hierarchy. I'm going to go to this little thingy right here. So what I did is when I built this, I did that. Remember like the tube that I made earlier? Like this is the tube. This is the final version of the tube where I just kind of like mucked it up a little bit by converting it to a sculptable object, and then just kind of like intentionally did a terrible job kind of roughing it around so it felt like this kind of like hand-hewn metal. It felt like an organic surface that some craftsperson like labored on and hammered in a long time ago, and it has like that kind of like vibe to it. Another thing that I didn't talk about is that when you create the sweep that I made just a second ago, there's also a rotation option. And so what I did with the rotation option is I added a rotation so you could have like a swept object kind of like twist on itself, and that's what creates this kind of like spiral look, which is like really fun. But it doesn't look much like a chandelier because I only have like one arm. So what I did is take advantage of these new features. One of the new features, which is a null. And null literally means like nothing, which is kind of like, pretty sad for the null to be called null. But it's also kind of like a great, encouraging thing because a null really is something. A null is not nothing because you can use it to control a bunch of stuff. So if I wanted to rotate all these objects at once, hey Paul, if I wanted to rotate all these objects at once, then I could just do that by creating a parent-child relationship with these nulls and then rotate the null. So what I can do is I'm going to hold down on this group of all of these little things, this arm, and I'm going to duplicate this, and then I can go to my transform, and I can rotate this around like so, and the clipping is happening so it's not synced. But then that's how I can create a lot of complexity very quickly by just taking these arms and copying them and rotating them around thanks to this like new structure, which is really great. Okay, so that's all I wanted to cover from Forger. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop back over to Cinema 4D, and we're going to get a little bit more into Gothic stuff. Gothic architecture, and just like the whole deal with Gothic things. So let's talk about, we're first going to talk about Gothic arches. I think Gothic arches are just like absolutely so gorgeous. And maybe this is like common knowledge. Maybe like those of you that are like really good artists, maybe like you're kind of like, oh yeah, everyone knows this. But most shapes in the world of like Gothic design are created with just circles. Even like really complex like swirls and the paisleys, it's all a combination of just like using circles to do everything. So the Gothic arch is no exception. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make one circle. And I'm going to actually change the orientation so it's XZ. It's like flat there on the ground. And I'm going to change the coordinates to -100 because it's a 200 centimeter circle. So I'm offsetting it by half its distance in that axis. And I'm going to control drag to make another copy. I'm going to use this as a +100. So then we create this shape, which is in sacred geometry called the Vesica Pisces, which is a really beautiful shape. If you think about it, I mean, also called the Venn diagram later, but originally, much before it was used as the Venn, whoever the Venn guy is that takes credit for this, this was a very common thing to do in geometry and in design as well. And if you think about it, it really is a beautiful and elegant symbol because it's like two things that come together and make a third thing. So it's like, as two people come together and make like a child, or, we come to SIGGRAPH and make LA a lot of money or whatever in the center. There's it's kind of like there's a beauty and a simplicity to two things coming together in a visual symbol of a thing that created by them. But what I can do here is put both of these into a spline mask object, a spline mask generator. And then in the spline mask, I'm going to make sure that it matches the orientation, which is XZ. And then I'm going to change the mode to and now I have this football type shape. And again, with the tools, Cinema 4D has like the best spline tools of like any DCC out there. Like the amount of spline tools, the things you could do with splines, it's absolutely amazing. So for creating designs like this, it's fantastic. Now all I need to do here is I'm going to make a rectangle, and I'm going to make this 200 by 200, 200 by 200. I'm going to also make this XZ, and I'm going to change the coordinates. Yeah, there we go. 200, is that right? Nope. 100. There we go. Now what I need to do is make another spline mask, and then put this bad dude in there, put this bad dude in there, and then, well, I'm saying all this stuff and then, but then it's kind of anticlimactic, but I need to union these. That's not working. I think I'm missing a step here. Okay, that's fine. That's fine if I'm missing a step. But you could tell that if I were to remove the content on the inside of this here, that we would have a Gothic window with the Gothic Arch. So really just that's how you create this like Gothic Arch, by having these two circles where their edges are lined up with the midpoints of the other one. And actually, interesting thing, I didn't talk about this yesterday, but the Gothic Arch was actually originally an Islamic arch. Several hundred years before the Europeans were calling it the Gothic Arch, people were in other parts of the world were making this the Islamic arch, which is kind of like sad to me that we call it the Gothic Arch when actually it had earlier origins. But thankfully, that was the only time in human history when white people have taken something from another culture and called it their own. But anyway, okay, so that's what that's that. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about Gothic architecture is that it came after, or it kind of took the place of what we call Romanesque architecture. And forgive me if this is kind of like Chad-splaining, because this was all new to me, and I found this really fascinating. But this is a good example of like Romanesque style architecture before Gothic stuff. And you'll notice, how teeny tiny that window is. And in an era like pre-electricity and pre-light bulbs, an area that big to light a church that colossal was probably not a great and non-creepy experience because of that. But in order to build a building that tall, you need the walls to do so much like supporting of the structure, so they had to be really, really thick. So then if you took a chunk out of that support structure to put a window in it, then that's kind of like a dangerous thing, because that was a load-bearing part of the wall that window is taking the place of, and you can't do that too much before you start having some problems. So the windows were like little tiny baby windows that didn't help very much. So then what they decided to do for Gothic architecture is make the walls very thin, and then you could have tons and tons of windows all over the place. And obviously that creates a little bit of a safety issue, but what they did is they had these things that supported the structure, apparently named by an 11-year-old boy, called flying buttresses. And I love Gothic architecture, if only for an excuse to say flying buttresses in a professional context over and over again. But these flying buttresses would hold up the side of the buildings so that the walls could be thinner, so that you could have more light. So I tend to think of, Gothic as like this like sinister thing. We talked about Hot Topic yesterday, like goth kids, emo kids, and stuff like that. It's like dark and evil and stuff like that. But at the time, Gothic architecture was like so full of light, so full of light, and probably, I'm guessing, the exact opposite of evil things, because it was just so full of light. Also, there's rib vaults. This is some footage I took in Notre Dame of Paris. This is the ceiling, the rib vaults. This also supported the structure so the walls could be thinner. And you can see how light this is. All right, for the inside, you have like all of this light coming in from all these windows, and this just wasn't possible before. But what's really interesting is that at the time, the term Gothic was like an insult. Like it wasn't like I didn't know where the term Gothic came from, but the first person to actually use, I didn't talk about this yesterday, but the first person to mention that was Raphael, like the great Renaissance artist. He was the first person to ever use the term Gothic to describe this stuff, but he was actually using it as an insult to describe this new art movement, because years before there had been this like war by the Goths. The Goths had come in by these barbarians, and they had conquered and stuff like that. And so Raphael was using it as like a pejorative to like insult Gothic stuff, to be like, yeah, it's just like a bunch of barbarians did. It's just like Gothic stuff, So first reference of Gothic architecture being Gothic was by Raphael. So add that to the pile of things, a pile of accomplishments. So, and that was years before he would take up martial arts and turn into a turtle. So pretty cool stuff. Before I go any further, I want to show you the final version of the gargoyle here. Oops, I'm all over the place. Here we go. I could use a mouse. So this is the final thing. So I should have showed this before I went into Forger. But this is the gargoyle that Ian showed how to make yesterday, and then we lit it. Let's see. I got time. I'm going to show you the process, because this is kind of interesting. I'm going to actually open up Zbrush and show you what he gave me and show you how I got to Cinema. One of the things I neglected to show you, which was really dumb on my part, a lot of regret here, there's a button in Forger that's send to Cinema 4D. So I can click a button and send this wirelessly into Cinema 4D, which is a really great way to move things around. And then there's a button in Cinema that's like Go Z, and I could send it right to ZBrush. So with just like a couple of like button taps, I could take something from Forger, whether it's like a polygonal model thing, sculpture, whatever, send it to Cinema, send it to ZBrush, send it from ZBrush, you do some like whatever ZBrush things to it, send it back to Cinema, and then there's a thing that sends back from Cinema to Forger. So like this whole pipeline is really, really sexy to me. It's really fantastic. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go to the tool area. Forgive me for being super ignorant about ZBrush. I literally know nothing. I feel like I'm just like I've been given a phonetic script, and I'm just like reading it. I don't even know what I'm doing. But if I click on Load Tool, I can navigate to the thing that Ian made, which is right here. And now it's this tool, and I can click and drag out, and then here we go. There's my tool. Oops, nope. Don't want to do that. I want to edit this. Oh, no, it's not letting me edit this. So what I did was I went into the subtools, and if you just export it like this, so if I just select a subtool, like the wings, for example, and then I want to export this, and I choose Go Z, then what happens is this comes in at a lower resolution, which is not great. So I learned from Ian, which is very helpful for me in case anybody needs this, is you need to go into the geometry section, increase the subdivisions all the way, and then click delete lower, which deletes all those lower subdivisions. And then when I go back to the tool menu here and I click Go Z, sends it right into Cinema at the high res version, and that's really great. So that's all I'm going to show you about ZBrush, and I didn't even do that very well because I don't even know what I'm doing. But it goes to show you that does work. So I'm going to open up the gargoyle here. I'm going to show you what I got from Ian. And we have, here we go. And there we go. Okay, so this is the original gargoyle. And I think for some reason the gargoyle itself, it doesn't look like this doesn't look like the high res version, but you can see like the low res or the high res and the column and the wings. But the low res stuff comes in kind of like blocky like this. So I might have done this one in a crappy way just so you knew what was going on. But I want to talk about like laying this out and creating a world. But before I do that, I'm going to go back into my splines really quick, because I talked about making this like Gothic Arch, but I didn't really talk about doing much with it. And as you can see in the final version here, I mean, it's kind of hard to see, but I didn't really light it very well in the back here. I kind of wanted to just have this like shape and kind of like silhouette, and I wanted it to be dark, but you kind of see the detail here in the background a little bit, I think. Yeah, maybe not. But I want to show you how to create this kind of like Gothic Arch because I think it's a pretty cool trick. So one of the things that I did, I'm going to turn these off. And I'm just going to delete those. I made these profiles. And using the same tools I showed you earlier where like you can combine splines with a spline mask, I just made like a diamond and then I added like a few circles here and there and using that same trick like created this kind of like profile. And then I also made kind of like a half profile, which is like just using a rectangle to kind of cut it so I have a half profile. And then what you can do is you can go into, what I could do is go into, let me turn this on here. I could go into an extrude object, put that profile in extrude, and you can see that this spline that didn't look that cool or interesting, just kind of looked noisy, there's like a bunch of doohickeys. Once you extrude it, it becomes something quite beautiful. And you could see that from the top, that this area right here, I put more effort into it. There's more like doohickeys, for lack of a better term. I don't think that's Gothic terminology, but you have all these little like thingies, and then on this other side, you don't have that stuff, and it just kind of feels empty. You know, it just kind of feels like hollow. And by the way, I created this by taking a diamond and then using the spline mask thing with circles. Again, with circles, everywhere circles. So there's a circle I used to cut out here. There's a circle that I used to cut out these corners. And that's how I made this thing. But when you add more circles, you add more detail to this design, and it creates something really elegant. So then what I can do is add a bend deformer to this. And so here's an example of a half profile that's completed here. It's extruded. And then I can take this bend deformer and give it the old bendy treatment. Woo woo. And there we have half of an arch. Then what I can do is get into a symmetry object, and I'll put this thing inside of a symmetry object. So now I have symmetry. I'm going to go to my object here, and I'm going to move this. And actually, I'm not on the right axis for symmetry, so I've got to change that. There we go. Now I need to move this bad dude. And once we get to the axis of symmetry here, we have an actual Gothic arch. So we take the circles, combine them to make the arch profile, and then we take the weird profile and extrude that along the shape to create a Gothic arch. So that's pretty fun. Now let's talk about the final composition, because I'm going to go ahead and turn off this imported one, turn on the camera that I had, and show you, like, this is the final layout. And one of the things that I neglected to talk about, unfortunately, when we were looking at Forger, is about the camera angle, the focal length. And here I have a screwy focal length, and it made it so that I had to do some interesting challenges. Like, to my eye, and this is all by eye, so maybe I'm wrong, and you would look at this and be like, that's all screwy and stupid. This looks fine. This looks like normal, but it's actually not normal. If I turn off the camera lens and you look at this, it's actually really screwy. It's really backwards. Look at how distorted and weird that is. Look how wrong all that stuff is. Look at the chandelier. The chandelier is like tilted like backwards and sideways. And even the columns in the background are askew. You see that? See how it's just like wonky? It's like kind of like at an angle. Like all this stuff is like super janky. And this is off. But I made it this way on purpose so that when I set it up with this camera, it worked because of the focal length. Let me talk about the focal length for a second. I'm going to go ahead and make a new camera. And I'm going to turn off all of the main scene things and just look at this guy right here. And actually, let's look through this new camera. So I wanted to create this kind of like sensation that this gargoyle is like coming out at you, that it's like really creepy, that there's like this distortion near the lens. And as try as I might with the regular camera that we all use in cinema, you kind of can't get that. I mean, you could put him closer to the camera, but it's not giving you that kind of like warped, distorted, uneasy feeling. So to do that, we need to change the focal length here. Now, a lot of people who are new to cinematography that start in the world of digital stuff, when they see focal length and they're looking at something like this and they adjust the focal length, it looks just kind of like zoom. You know, as you increase the focal length, it looks like you zoom in. As you decrease the focal length, it appears you just like zoom out. But actually, much more is going on here. When you're using real-world lenses and you use a wider angle lens, which is a lower focal length, it has different optical properties, which are actually quite unique. And so if I take this down to a low focal length, it's like a very wide lens. Let's say like a 12mm lens. It seems like we just made this thing zoom out. But as I bring back this and I frame this with the same framing that we had before, then we create this like weird distortion. Do you see how like distorted that is? Like the face is just kind of like coming out at you. It's just like super in your business. Like, hey, what are you eating? What are you eating? It's my inner critic every time I go to eat. It has a very, very wide angle lens on it. But you see also too that it's doing some weird distortion to the wings there. Now, hold this image in your mind of what these wings look like when this creature. Whoa, geez, okay. When this creature is like in your face like that, notice like what the wings are doing. Notice the shape and the angle of the wings. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to increase this a lot and back out. And now look at the wings. Look at the wings. They look so much more wide open at similar framing because the focal length changes so much more than zoom. It changes the relationship of all of the objects in the shot to each other. Wide angle lenses, so lenses with a low focal length, they tend to create separation between things. And then longer lenses, with a higher focal length, they tend to smash things together. So if you have like bokeh in a shot, like everybody likes to put like bokeh little sparkly things in your shot, and you have them behind a character, if you want to bring those closer to your character, but you don't want to actually physically move them, then you use a longer lens. And the lens will do all the work for you of bringing those objects closer to your scene without actually having to move anything other than you might need to change the camera to kind of like reframe everything. But what a difference that makes with when the face is close here with the long lens, the wings are like huge and spread out, but when we have the same framing, or similar, I can't do the same framing, but look at that. When we get the face close to us with this framing, look at what the wings are doing. It's a completely different story. So what I had to do for this thing, I'm just gonna turn off this thing and then turn on all the rest of the stuff. In the film world, we call this cheating. And you know, like when we're doing like training sessions and stuff like that, you know, we always like say cheating and stuff like that. Like, here's this keyboard shortcut, and this is like a cheat because then you could just do it like so much better. We use like the term cheat like all over the place indiscriminately. But in the film world, it means something very specific where you show the viewer something and then you kind of like hack it in another shot. And so let me show you some examples of this. Here's something that I shot. So in this shot from a movie I did, this little girl just gets discovered, and it's like a really bad thing, and she's been like hidden, and these people find her, and it's like this like really big deal. And so notice the relation of like how tall she is to how tall they are. So I wanted to follow this up with a point of view shot from like what it looked like from her vantage point looking out. And so this is the next shot. So she's kind of getting dwarfed by these people, and then but what actually in reality, like to exaggerate this effect, we had the camera much, much lower than she was. So we'd say that we cheated the camera. We cheated the camera by making it lower in order to get this effect, when in actuality she was not that much shorter. So it's a cheat. Here's another example from the same film. I did this for LinkedIn, this like filmmaking training on LinkedIn. And so this, like all these guys were standing in this kind of like tribunal type thing. And the guy on the left here and then the guy in the center, like he's standing, but I wanted to get this shot. And I wanted to compose the shot just like this. And there's no way to compose this shot at this angle with that dude standing. So we cheated it. We had him sit down, and it's still, when you cut it together, no one thinks, hey, why is that guy sitting? We cheated him. This is another example, too. Sometimes we cheat lights on a film set. This is from The Body Snatchers, a really great movie with Boris Karloff and Lon Chaney. And so this is Boris Karloff standing, and you can see that this is a really dark image, that the right side of his face is completely in shadow, completely dark. There's no light on it all whatsoever. But when they go in for the reverses, they light his face with a much more flattering Rembrandt lighting. So we see that he has light on his eye and that little like famous inverted triangle on his face, but that wasn't in this shot. So we would say that we cheated the light. We did something unnatural in order to make something more beautiful, and hopefully no one notices that we're cheating. This is very common when you go for a close-up, you bring in lights closer and make things like look better. So that's what I did in this final composition. I cheated this. So I cheated his wings, I cheated the chandelier, I cheated the columns in the background to make it feel like I had the composition that I wanted. Another thing that I did here, and I don't know if we have time to get much into it, so I'll just kind of like show you the renders here. Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to like light this in a way that was like really creepy, even though like we talked about the Gothic stuff, you know, it really is about light and not about like dark, creepy, hot topic things, but I wanted to make it dark, creepy, hot topic. But as I'm lighting this, you know, like I'm trying to catch the edge of this wing, which puts that in light and then creates a shadow here. It creates a light on the edge of the knee of the gargoyle, and then a little bit of light shows through, so we have a little bit of light right here, which creates a silhouette of the gargoyle. And so I'm basically staggering light and dark and light and dark and light and dark. And that's really one of the key things for lighting something is that we want to have this kind of like staggering of light and dark and light and dark. And that's, you know, a lot of times like people ask like, well, how do I light something? How do I make something look good? There's a lot of keys to lighting, but ultimately that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to like stagger these areas of contrast. And I wanted to show you some other examples of that. So here's like a Rembrandt painting, and you can see like I mean, it's kind of hard to tell maybe on that screen, but you know, in the background we have like a lighter area, and then that's contrasted by his like dark hat. And then we have like light areas of gray of his hair, and then for some reason his hair just like gets really dark right there. And then he has the light areas of his face, and then like the area of shadow, and then we have area of light right here, and then dark, light, dark. And so we stagger these areas of light and dark, and it's a masterful thing to do to control the clothing and the light and the lighting angle and everything, so that you get this kind of like staggering. And that's why you don't see too many Rembrandt paintings where like it's like lit from the front, where it's just like light and dark, because it's really unflattering. It's not attractive. Another aspect of this is that the light is kind of catching these edges and bringing out the 3D-ness. And that's another aspect of lighting that is oftentimes kind of like neglected when we're doing digital stuff, but you know, something you can't avoid when you're on a physical set because you're lighting a 3D human. And so you kind of want to bring out these like edge lights and things like that, because then you're just seeing just like the edge of something, the 3D-ness of something. And that's why this like Rembrandt lighting is so flattering, to have a light coming at this angle so that the nose creates this shadow, and we have this inverted triangle. So we have like, we really see the 3D-ness of the nose and the cheek by lighting things in this way. Another example from I Walked with a Zombie, another phenomenal old classic movie, 1960. Then we have like light, dark, light, and these like staggering of contrast and such. This is another example. This is really hard to see, I think, probably from your vantage point, but Boris Karloff, as we talked about, is in shadow, and then this brick wall is being lit here with some like fall off light. But then here's the brilliance of this. There's like this kind of like corner right here, this vertical corner, and it's in shadow. And for the part of Boris Karloff's face that's already in shadow, they lit his nose. I can't imagine how much time they had to do to rehearse this so that he was in the exact right spot, so just the edge of his nose would be lit. But when his face is in shadow, if it would have been in shadow over that area, it would have been shadow on shadow, and that's not acceptable. So we lit just his nose. They lit just his nose, so then the part that's over this post would be light. So it would still be staggered, dark, light, and not just kind of like blend into each other, which I think is really spectacular, really, really gorgeous. Godfather, claimed as being like one of those beautiful films, and so painterly, and we're seeing that staggering of light and dark like all over the place with the way things were lit. So anyways, that is my presentation. Thank you so much for watching. Stay up tuned next for Ian Robinson, who's going to be doing some more like Gothic sculpting in Zbrush. Ian, Epic Gargoyle Sculptor Robinson, up next.
Yeah. Woo! All right. Nice job, Chad.
Thank you.
Good times. Any questions for Chad? He will be at the Dell booth right after this. Yeah, Alex Parker for the win.
What's happening under the hood that makes it different in prepping a model for modeling or having a prep for sculpting? Those two different things.
Okay.
That's a question. So the question is, what's happening under the hood when it's prepping for sculpting or modeling? I don't know. Like, what's it doing in the conversion process?
I guess so. To rephrase, when you're building your tube and you were adding all your edge loops and kind of reinforcing it,
Yeah.
and you had kind of like right click drop down menu, and it had your like modeling option and it had your sculpting option.
Yes.
I guess what's the difference between those two? Why can you not do both?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So it's very similar to cinema in that like you have like a primitive object and it sees all the primitivity of like, it has like a radius and it has like the inner thing or whatever. And then once you convert it, it's like making it a polygonal object. It just sees like the polygons or whatever. And then apparently that's not something that the sculpting tools can deal with. So then when you make it sculptable, it kind of turns it into a sculptable mesh. And and then you could remesh. I didn't show that on here, but there's Z-remesher and a basic remesh, and then also a subdivision levels thing, so you can kind of get back to that spot. But so you can't use, and you can't like have you can't like be sculpting on something and then also take a polygon and just kind of like pull it out. You'd have to make it editable and then pull the polygon out, and you can make it sculptable again and kind of go back and forth like that.
So it's kind of like mode switching when you're in like cinema sculpting. Like okay.
Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay. Cool.
Cool. Awesome. Another question.
So when you design the light and the shadow and the shapes, suppose when you do it wrongly. Like in reality, if there's a light, the shadow will not be that way. Not will have automatically reflected that. Like to match it as much as
I think I missed like a really important part of your question. So you're saying like when I'm throwing lights on something.
So when you do that, for example,
The gargoyle?
yes, you design it, right? You design the icons, you design the light, you design the shadow, right? But when you design it, maybe that's not what happens in reality. Because in reality, when you have a light, the shadow will be like this, not like that.
Oh, so lighting and shadowing, like how to create that?
Well, I don't know if because I think that like the lights are set up to try to work in the real world. They are, so I don't have to tell it where the shadows are. Like it sees the geometry and then it kind of just like creates the shadows.
So it will capture the reality well.
Yeah,
Right.
It's more of a real world. It's still like you would if you're setting up a scene in real life, if you're using props, if there was a gargoyle. So art directing the shadows is really art directing the lights.
Yeah.
How do you get to that? So when you design it, you read the data from the reality to design that way. So how do you realize it?
Yeah, so through the render engine, it does all the light calculations. So the render engine does all that for you. Once you set it up, it does all the ray tracing and all the light calculations to give you the realistic looks and shadows. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're very welcome. Cool. Yeah, so Chad will be available at the Dell booth. So if you wanted to deep dive with him, he'll be available. And then if you're interested in more sculpting, we have a lot coming up next with Ian Robinson. I think Epic Gargoyle Sculptor, actually. So stay tuned for that, and we'll be back right after this quick break.
Thank you.